This is the jig I'm going to use to help me. It's just a disc of Delrin because I happened to have it lying around. And I've made a little plug to go in here, which is basically 5mm. 4.99 depending on where you read it. That's quite short, doesn't need to stick up far at all. And this allows me to assemble this thing without a great deal of fighting. So I put in that brass washer. Put in that brass washer, there's a little hole there, that's where our little pawl sits. We have our rewind spring. This winds in here like a clock spring. And you are winding it in anti-clockwise. And yes, it will want to fly again around the room if you give it half a chance. Okay, so that's sitting there in the case. You can see it's hooked in here. Right, our ratchet ball sits in there. Now the stub of my jig supports the centre of that ratchet ball. We'll get this spring hooked in. It hooks into that other gap and the tail of it tucks down behind the spring that we've just fitted. We'll put the pawl in place and you'll be able to tell which way it goes in because it's got to drop into those notches. I'll lift that spring out and hook it behind the pawl. The pawl is now engaged with that little ratchet wheel. This cover plate goes on and that little cutout goes over where that pawl is. Now I don't think that's particularly important at all. I'm not sure that it stays there, but it's there for the moment, so that's a good start. Just making sure that all this is seated as well as I can get it to seat. Then we've got this plate. Now this plate has a flat tab on it here which engages with this spring. So I'm getting that tab seated in the end of that spring. Now I've got to rotate this plate anti-clockwise and get this tab hooked round behind there. So I'll pull the plate out towards my left hand here, rotate that plate and hook the tab behind that lever. Now that little brass washer had dropped out of place there. I'm just pushing that back into position. Now that's sitting there like a ticking time bomb. I'm holding that between my fingers and thumb. See if I can get this camera to focus a bit better. Hang on a minute. Then I want to get this piece in here and engage the square drive with it with that little gear. You can hear the ratchet of the pawl as I move that. I know I'm together. Where's my brass washer? I'm holding this all together firmly with my fingers because I don't want this flying apart. Right, so there we have our film advance ready to go back on the camera. It's assembled. It shouldn't be a great fight to put that back in place. And we can go through the joys of putting that back in place once I've finished cleaning up this body. This is the camera with the Prontor SVS shutter that needs to be serviced. So that was just a glimpse of the film advance, how to take it off in one piece. And if you don't need to disassemble it, don't. And later I'll show you how to put it back without much of a fight, or with less of a fight than usual. That one, I have to say, that went together as smoothly as they could possibly go. The other one I did wouldn't go back together smoothly, and the reason was that large coiled clock spring was distorted. Basically it didn't want to lie flat, and it was very keen to fling stuff all around the room. Never mind. The important thing at the moment is we can carry on with this Paxette. Let's get this one apart. Remove my rewind knob. Like the previous camera, this one has 3 screws holding the top cover in position. All of this stuff is pretty dirty. It's going to benefit from a clean. This particular camera, the rewind shaft should lift off with the top without a fight. The top is quite possibly stuck in position where that light sealing yarn has been glued into place. It certainly is. There's also a little pin here, a dowel. It makes it difficult to get the top off. Later cameras had 2 screws at this end of the body, and possibly, although I haven't checked for sure, they deleted that dowel. Okay, let's see if we can get this top off. Oh, it's very reluctant. It's moving. But not as quickly as I'd like. I'll remove that rewind. Then I can get a screwdriver in under here. It is moving, but that glue is really reluctant. Yeah, it's coming now. Okay, so that's the top off the body. Now this is a Super. The Super has a rangefinder, a coupled rangefinder. At the top of the body, we've got our yarn as we did previously. Now here you'll see we've got the frame counter. The frame counter is very much the same as the one I've just shown you. As a matter of interest, let's just delve into that while we're here and see if there was a washer. There may or may not have been. Well, there's no washer between those two plates. No washer there. Little angle plate is there, it's a slightly different shape. Here is the counter disc, and that has a washer under it, but it's nothing like the washer we saw with the previous one. Now that pretty much mirrors what I saw in one of my parts cameras I pulled apart for a quick look. Okay, anything else to see in this top cover? Not much apart from the dirt. This port on the back here, that's for adjusting your rangefinder. That port would unscrew and that would give you access to the adjustment of the rangefinder here. Yes, I can see that and adjusting this one would involve rotating this disc here. I'm just looking at the rangefinder, seeing if I can lift it off in one piece, because I would very much like to be able to do that. Then I can dismantle it at my leisure, or put it back all in one piece. Well, there's a screw here. That just lifted off a lot of the paint with it. There's a screw there. We'll remove those two screws. They're quite long screws, I'm keeping an eye on that. Now this screw here, that's pivoting on, it appears to be screwed into the top of the body. Now on the last camera we did, there was a plate that held the cocking rack in position. On this camera it appears that the rangefinder takes the place of that plate. Now this spring here, the return spring for our rangefinder, that's on that screw that I'm about to remove. So I'm just looking to see if I can unhook that spring so it doesn't fly across the room. It doesn't look like I can. Let's see if it'll lift off together with the body. Okay. So that screw is just loose in there at the moment. This is all sprung loaded. And you can see we have don't have a prism here, we have a mirror. And then we have a little lens here, and that's what swings with the with the focus adjustment. And then we have a semi-silvered mirror here, our viewfinder eyepiece here, and our viewfinder front port here. Let's put that carefully down and hope it doesn't fly to pieces. So what have we got here? Well, this is much the same as the arrangement on the other camera. I'll just unscrew that and get that spring off there. Sometimes it's easier to unhook the spring, sometimes it's easier to undo the screw. This spring looks like it's ready to come off, so we'll just lift off that spring. There's that rack. Now really the problem with this camera was, there were multiple problems. This one had the stiff film advance when we started. Part of that was down to that film advance lever that I've had apart, cleaned and put back and shown you how that works. And the rest of it was down to this sort of filth. There's a lot of grit and dust in here. And this grease has gone a brown colour. It looks like rust, but it's not. It's just dried out grease. Okay, so we've got that off there. We need to remove our sprocket shaft again. What's the arrangement on this camera? Well, it looks to be exactly the same as the last camera. It looks like it's got a tension pin through it. So I'll need to use a punch and knock that tension pin out. Now, a point of interest with that, was that tension pin on the last camera. There were two holes, one above the other. And it turns out that that tension pin should have been in the lower of the two holes. When I did a test assembly early in the piece, it was in the upper hole and you couldn't depress the rewind. You'd press it down but it wouldn't disengage. Now this one, the sprocket shaft here is all chewed up. I have an idea why it might be chewed up, and we'll talk about that later. I've got a few parts cameras here, so I'm not bothered by that. I'll have a better sprocket that I can put in place. Let's see if this pin will move for us without fighting. Yeah, it's moving. And it's sticking out now about, getting on for about 2.5 millimetres, a bit less than an 1/8 of an inch, that's for sure. See if I can get pliers on that and pull it out. No, I don't dare squeeze that too tight, it'll distort, we'll never end up be able to use it again. I think I can push it the rest of the way out. I'll try again. Yep, it's out. Okay, so we've got our tension pin. It doesn't look awful, I think that'll do. Okay, so we've got to get this little sleeve out of the body here. Yeah, I pressed up on the shaft at the top here and it pushed that out. That's got a little return spring in it, or should have. And what do you know, it doesn't have one. Okay. Sometimes you discover interesting things with these cameras. The shaft, we've got nothing holding that now, that should push out the bottom. There we go, and like the last camera, this has got two holes. When that pin goes back in, it's got to go back in the bottom hole. Now here's my sprocket. I'll zoom you in a little bit. I think you can see the state of that sprocket there. See, it's all chewed off here and broken away here. Now there's a couple of things that could have been going on there. Someone may have been forcibly rewinding the film without holding down the rewind button. People do things like that. And there's another possibility that if the tension was too high, or this was gummed up, this is the slipping clutch that goes on the take-up spool, if that was locked up tight so that there was no slippage, then it would be pulling film through the camera faster than the sprocket wanted to feed it, and something would give. And either this would chew away, or the teeth would chew away, or the sprocket here would chew away, or the film would tear to pieces. There aren't many other options. But this is certainly damaged. And I think one of my ugly pieces here that's missing all sorts of other stuff is going to be called in to serve as an organ donor for this one. So yeah, that's not good. However, at the moment, oh, look at that. Look at that washer. That may have been on the sprocket shaft. We'll have to investigate that, because that matches that washer we had with the other camera. So 4 screws, same as last time. Let's see what lengths they are. The other camera we had 2 different lengths. I know some cameras have 3 different lengths. For this camera, someone's been in here before. The return spring was missing from the film rewind. There should have been a small coil spring in there, it was gone. Let's get these screws out. Yes, I think we have 3 different lengths of screw here. And that just appeared from nowhere. It's like a washer, conical. Yeah, see, these 2 are different lengths. Typically the short one fits in at the top from memory, and so it clears the cable release socket on the front of the camera. Okay, the shutter should lift off, I think. Okay, so here the focus mount complete has lifted off the front. Here's the shutter body held to the housing here. Now that hasn't come adrift yet. It has now. There's its cocking mechanism there. You see that little wheel with a pin on it? That couples with this thing. Now that's different to the other camera, different arrangement. It basically does the same job. 2 ways of going about the same job. Now this shutter will be quite different. Okay, this pin here that we see sitting here, that's our coupling for the rangefinder. That passes right through the front of the shutter, and it acts against this ring on the back of the lens. And as the focus is changed here, this rises or falls, pushes that pin inwards or outwards. That can come off. That just sat in under here. They're focusing that pin here for the focus adjustment for the rangefinder. That sat in there. This plate sat in there like that, and it acts against that pin. On the front of that plate there's a little raised spot, and it's that little raised spot that contacts the lens. So this is intermediate between the pin and the lens, as I incorrectly told you before. The lens bore on it directly. Okay, so the shutter. Now in this case the shutter is built into this piece. It's not a separate thing that we can take apart. This is the shutter. which makes it a bit more entertaining to take apart. I'll clear the decks, we'll get into the shutter.